On a hellish piece of volcanic rock in the Pacific, one man was given a mission deemed nearly suicidal. Armed with a weapon designed for a crew of two, he was ordered to charge directly into the teeth of a fortified Japanese line. The question wasn't if he would fall, but when. Yet, what happened next defied all tactical logic. This is the story of a Marine who became a one-man army, a story of how courage, fused with sheer, unrelenting fury, can break an unbreakable line. This is the story of the assault that would etch a single name into legend. The Japanese couldn't stop this Marine with a two-man weapon till 16 bunkers fell in 30 minutes. The date was February 21st, 1945. The location, Iwo Jima, Sulphur Island. For the men of the 5th Marine Division, D-Day was 2 days past, but the battle had already settled into a brutal, yard-by-yard slaughter. And on this day, on the approaches to Hill 382, one of the main anchors of the Japanese defensive network, a crisis was brewing. A company of Marines was pinned down, being methodically cut apart by a deadly interlocking maze of fortified positions. The order came down. Someone had to silence those guns. Forward was Corporal Tony Stein. To understand the scale of Corporal Stein's actions, one must first understand the battlefield and the weapon in his hands. Iwo Jima was not an island, it was a fortress. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi had transformed its 8 square miles of volcanic ash, rocky ridges, and sulfur vents into the most formidable defensive complex American forces would face in the Pacific War. The landscape was a nightmare. A gray, barren expanse offering no cover, cratered by shellfire, and concealing over 1,500 caves and 16 miles of tunnels. Every yard was pre-sighted for murderous crossfire. The 28th Marine Regiment, part of the 5th Division, was tasked with driving north straight into the heart of this labyrinth. Their immediate objective was a complex of hills dominating the center of the island. Hills 382, 362A, and 362B. The Marines called this terrain the meat grinder. And on the morning of February 21st, Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, found itself squarely in the grinder's gears. They were advancing up a rocky slope when the terrain itself seemed to erupt. Concealed Japanese bunkers and pillboxes built from reinforced concrete and cunningly carved into the volcanic rock opened fire simultaneously. Heavy machine guns, Nambu-type 92s chattered, knee mortars dropped rounds with terrifying accuracy. From firing ports invisible at 200 yards, Japanese defenders rained a storm of steel on the exposed Marines. Within minutes, the advance stalled. Men were hit. The company was trapped on the open slope, taking casualties with every passing second. They needed direct, overwhelming fire on those emplacements, and they needed it now. The solution, in theory, was the M18A2 Browning automatic rifle, the BAR. A superb weapon, it was the squad's base of fire. But it was a two-man system. One man to fire the 20-pound rifle, a second to carry the heavy magazines and provide security. In the thick ash of Iwo, every movement was exhausting. A two-man team was a larger target, slower. The Japanese gunners knew to look for the barmen first. Corporal Tony Stein, a 24-year-old former tool and die maker from Dayton, Ohio, saw the problem differently. He had already modified his own bar, salvaged from a wrecked Navy fighter plane on the beach. He stripped it down, removing the bipod and flash hider to save weight, turning it into a rapid assault weapon. He carried it one-handed. And around his neck and stuffed in his pockets, he carried his own ammunition. Tony Stein had made himself a one-man fire team. The order from the company commander was desperate and direct to take out those bunkers. There was no detailed plan, no covering artillery barrage scheduled. It was a task of simple, brutal execution. Stein looked at the slope ahead, seeing the muzzle flashes winking from a dozen dark openings in the rock. He knew each flash represented a nest of disciplined soldiers waiting to kill him. He adjusted the sling on his modified bar. He checked the extra magazines hooked to his belt. He wore only a helmet and a dungaree jacket, having shed his pack for mobility. With a nod to his comrades providing what little covering fire they could muster, he moved. The first 50 yards were a dead sprint. Ash kicked up around his boots, but the Japanese, focusing on the pinned-down platoon, were slow to react to this single sprinting figure. Stein didn't head for cover. He headed straight for the first bunker, a low, squat structure of concrete and earth. At 30 yards, he dropped to one knee. The Japanese machine gunner inside swiveled his weapon, but he was too late. Stein raised the bar to his shoulder and fired a sustained burst. Smoke drifted from the aperture, but now he was exposed. The blast of his own weapon had pinpointed him for every enemy soldier on the hill. Fire immediately began to seek him out. Bullets snapped past his head, kicking up geysers of gray ash. Stein didn't retreat. He used the geography of chaos. He lunged forward, using shell craters as temporary cover, moving in a zigzag pattern toward the next target. By 10:30 hours, he had silenced 3 positions. His technique was audacious. He would sprint to within point-blank range of a bunker side or rear, where the firing ports didn't face. He'd empty a magazine into the entrance or ventilation shaft, then often pull the pin on a grenade and toss it inside for good measure. He was no longer just a rifleman. He was a craftsman of close-quarters destruction. His modified bar, light and fast handling, was the perfect tool. But it came at a cost. The weapon, fired on full auto so often, began to overheat. The barrels on the early bar were not quick change. Stein's hands were burning, but he kept firing. He'd exhaust his magazines, then sprint back through the gauntlet of fire to the American lines, not for safety, but for resupply. More ammo? He'd yell, dropping empty magazines. Marines would hand him full ones, sometimes stuffing grenades into his pockets. He'd gulp down a mouthful of water, wipe the grime and sweat from his eyes, and then turn and charge back into the inferno. Each return trip was as dangerous as the assault. Japanese snipers and riflemen now knew this lone, relentless Marine was their greatest threat. By noon, the situation for Company A was still critical, but a crack had appeared in the Japanese line. 5 bunkers had been obliterated by Stein's one-man offensive. But the heart of the defensive network remained, a complex of at least 11 more interlinked positions covering the main approach to Hill 382. These were heavier, better protected, with overlapping fields of fire that covered each other. An attack on one meant exposure to 2 others. The company commander, seeing Stein's incredible effectiveness, made a fateful decision. He could not order another man on what was effectively a suicide run, but he could support the one who was volunteering for it. He coordinated with a nearby 37 Me gun crew. A light them up for the barman was the essence of the order. The plan was simple and exceptionally dangerous. The 37 Me would fire canister shot, essentially a giant shotgun shell, at the bunker apertures to suppress the gunners. In the few seconds of confusion and damage that followed, Stein would close in and finish the job. His face blackened with powder and ash, his uniform stained with sweat, listened to the plan. He nodded. He gathered 8 more magazines. He checked the action on his smoking hot bar. Temperature was climbing. The sulfur stench of the island mixed with the cordite and the smell of death. The stage was set for the most intense 30 minutes of his life. At approximately 13:20 hours, the supporting 37 Me gun cracked from its position several hundred yards back. The whoomp of the canister round was followed by a spray of metal pellets shredding the air around a Japanese pillbox. The machine gun fire from that position stuttered. Stein was already moving. He covered the ground in a low, weaving dash. The Japanese, however, were adapting. Fire from a supporting bunker to the left now tracked him. Bullets tore into the ground at his heels. For a moment, he was caught in the open halfway between craters. He hit the dirt, crawling frantically as rounds impacted all around him. It seemed impossible. The crossfire was too dense. The plan was falling apart before it began. Back in the company line, Marines watched, hearts in their throats. It looked like a death sentence. Their lone champion was about to be cut down. The 37 Me gun fired again at the second bunker, forcing the gunners to duck. In that infinitesimal lull, Stein found his opening. He surged to his feet and covered the last 15 yards to the first bunker in a final, desperate sprint. He flung himself against its concrete side, breathing heavily. He was safe from that bunker's fire, but exposed to the others. He had seconds to act. He edged to the firing port, now a mangled hole from the canister shot. He inverted his bar and fired a full magazine blind through the opening, hosing the interior with fire. Screams echoed from within. He tossed in 2 grenades and ducked away. The subsequent explosions were muffled, final. Bunker 6 was dead, that the cost was immediate. A sniper's round from higher on the hill struck his helmet with a sharp ping, spinning it off his head. Another round grazed his forearm, drawing a line of blood. Stein ignored it. The heat from his bar was now searing. He could barely hold the forearm of the weapon without his glove smoking. He wrapped a rag around it and kept going. The next 4 bunkers fell in a blur of violence over the next 10 minutes. It was a relentless cycle. The 37 would fire, Stein would rush, the Japanese would try to shift fire, and Stein would deliver the killing burst or grenade. He was a phantom, a demon of movement and fire. He used the dust and smoke created by the 37 impacts as a screen. He moved from crater to wrecked bunker, using the corpses of the fortifications he had just killed as cover to assault the next one. Yet the physical toll was immense. The repeated sprints under load, the adrenaline crashes, the burns on his hands, the blood loss from his graze, all were draining him. By 1340 hours, he had silenced 10 bunkers. But the core of the network, a reinforced complex of 6 larger positions, lay ahead. These were connected by tunnels, allowing defenders to reinforce or reposition. Knocking out one might not be permanent. The company commander, seeing Stein's slowing movements, made the call over the radio. "We need to pull him back. He's done enough." But before the runner could be sent, the Japanese launched a local counterattack from a trench line to the right of the bunker complex. A squad of Japanese infantry, bayonets fixed, charged down a gully towards Stein's flank, hoping to overrun him while he was focused on the bunkers. Stein saw them coming. He was caught between 2 threats, the bunkers ahead and the charging infantry on his flank. He swung his bar toward the new threat. The weapon, pushed beyond its limits, jammed. Was the crisis point. Alone with a jammed weapon, wounded, with enemy infantry charging from one direction and machine guns tracking him from another, Tony Stein was out of option. The miraculous run seemed over. The Japanese, it appeared, had finally found a way to stop the unstoppable Marine. In that frozen sliver of time between the heartbeat of a jam and the closing bayonet, instinct and training took over. Stein didn't try to clear the complex jam. He didn't run. He dropped the bar and in one fluid motion drew his .45 caliber 1911 pistol from its holster. The charging Japanese were less than 20 yards away. Stein stood his ground, a solitary figure against the gray landscape. He raised the pistol in a 2-handed grip and began to fire. Crack, crack. Crack, the reports were sharp and distinct against the backdrop of battle. His aim was deliberate, calm. One enemy soldier fell, then another. The charge, intended to overwhelm him, faltered under this precise, unexpected resistance. The covering Marines from Company A, seeing his plight, redoubled their fire on the gully, cutting down the remaining attackers. The immediate infantry threat dissolved, but Stein was still in the open, with a pistol, facing multiple bunkers. Then he did something that cemented his legend. He turned his back on the silent bunkers he had already killed and ran, not back to his lines, but toward the 37 gun position. He sprinted through the fire-swept zone, past the craters and the bodies, his empty bar in one hand, his smoking .45 in the other. He skidded into the gun pit. "My bar jammed! Hotter than hell!" he yelled to the astonished gun crew. "I need another one." There was no spare bar, but a quick-thinking Marine from the gun crew had an idea. He pointed to a .30 caliber machine gun that had been disabled by a mortar blast earlier in the day. "The belt feed's wrecked, but the action might be good. Can you use it like a big rifle?" Stein didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy M1919 machine gun, its tripod discarded. He checked the chamber. It was clear. The mechanism, despite the damaged feed tray, could chamber and fire a round if manually fed. It was a single-shot, 30-pound rifle. It was insane. It was perfect. He slung a belt of ammunition over his shoulder. With the gun crew providing covering fire with their 37 rifles, Stein charged back into the battle, now carrying the crippled machine gun. He reached the carcass of the last bunker he'd destroyed. From this vantage, he had a clear line of sight to the remaining complex. What followed was a masterclass in tenacity and marksmanship under fire. Stein used the heavy machine gun as a precision weapon. He would single-load a round, brace the hot barrel against the concrete rubble, and aim for the narrow firing slits of the remaining bunkers, now just 50-75 yards away. The .30 caliber armor-piercing rounds had far more penetrating power than his bar rounds. Boom! A round would slam into an aperture, sparking and ricocheting murderously inside the confined space. Boom! Another. He worked methodically, systematically, under relentless incoming fire. One by one, the Japanese positions fell silent. A grenade from a supporting Marine finally cleared the last stubborn bunker of the complex. By approximately 1350 hours, the hill fell quiet. The interlocking network of 16 fortified positions, pillboxes, bunkers, and machine gun nests had been completely neutralized. For 30 minutes, Tony Stein had been a whirlwind of destruction. He had made 8 separate trips through enemy fire to resupply. He had fought with a bar, a pistol, and a disabled machine gun. He had been wounded. His hands were raw with burns, but he had done it. The path for Company A was open. The immediate result of Stein's actions was the salvation of Company A and the capture of a vital approach to Hill 382. The company, which had been facing annihilation, was now able to advance and consolidate the ground. Medics moved up to treat the wounded. The scale of the defense he had single-handedly shattered became apparent as Marines inspected the positions, each one a masterpiece of camouflage and construction, each one now a tomb. But the battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. Tony Stein, after receiving first aid for his wound, refused evacuation. He rejoined his squad. His war would continue for another week. On March 1, 1945, during the relentless fighting near Hill 362B, Tony Stein was shot and killed by a Japanese sniper while scouting ahead of his platoon. The man who had survived a gauntlet of bunkers fell to a single, hidden enemy. The cost of Iwo Jima was staggering. Of the approximately 70,000 U.S. Marines who landed, nearly 7,000 were killed and over 20,000 wounded. The Japanese garrison of around 21,000 was virtually annihilated, with only 216 taken prisoner. In this cauldron of sacrifice, individual heroism often went unrecorded, but not Stein's. For his actions on February 21, 1945, Corporal Anthony L. Stein was posthumously awarded the United States' highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. His citation reads, in part, facing withering enemy fire, he charged one hostile position after another. His aggressive initiative, valiant spirit, and extreme heroism reflect the highest credit upon Corporal Stein and the U.S. Naval Service. His legacy is one of transcendent courage and tactical brilliance. He demonstrated that the will of one determined individual armed with ingenuity and utter fearlessness could alter the outcome of a localized battle. He was the embodiment of the Marine Corps ethos: improvise, adapt, overcome. The weapon may have been designed for 2 men, but on that day it only needed 1. The story of Corporal Tony Stein is a stark reminder of the individual moments of valor that, stitched together, form the tapestry of victory in a global war. It is a story of a toolmaker from Ohio who, on a distant volcanic island, used a tool of war to craft a legend. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.
In the annals of war, there are moments that defy all understanding. Moments where the cold calculus of military odds is shattered by a single, indomitable human spirit. On one of the most hellish battlefields of the Pacific, a battlefield designed to grind men into dust, one United States Marine was given an order that bordered on a death sentence. His weapon was the M1918A2 Browning automatic rifle, a weapon built for a 2-man crew. His objective was a fortress hill, honeycombed with mutually supporting bunkers. His time frame was measured in minutes. The Japanese defenders had every advantage: elevation, fortification, and the grim determination to die in place. They had not accounted for the fury of one man. This is the story of an assault so audacious, so brutally effective, it remains a benchmark of individual courage. The Japanese couldn't stop this Marine with a 2-man weapon until 16 bunkers fell in 30 minutes. The date was February 21, 1945. The place, the central sector of Iwo Jima, a scarred and smoking wasteland the Marines called the meat grinder. For the men of Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division, the battle had degenerated into a bloody stalemate. They were pinned on an ash-covered slope, their advance halted, their lives measured by the traverse of hidden machine guns. And in that desperate hour, a 24-year-old corporal from Dayton, Ohio, stepped forward. To grasp the sheer impossibility of Corporal Tony Stein's task, one must first comprehend the fortress he was ordered to assault. Iwo Jima was Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi's masterpiece of defensive warfare. He had forsaken wasteful banzai charges for a doctrine of mutual defense and attrition. The island was a Swiss cheese of over 1,500 interconnected caves, reinforced concrete pillboxes, and subterranean barracks, all linked by 16 miles of tunnels. The terrain itself was a weapon. Soft volcanic ash that swallowed men and vehicles, and jagged rock that channeled attackers into pre-sighted killing zones. Company A's immediate nightmare was a complex of fortified positions guarding the approaches to Hill 382, the second highest point on the island, and a linchpin of the Japanese defensive line. On this morning, the company found itself in a textbook kill zone. From concealed firing ports, Japanese machine guns, the reliable Type 92 Heavy and the lighter Type 96, unleashed interlocking bands of fire. Their arcs were meticulously planned. To advance toward one bunker meant exposing your flank to two others. 50 M&A mortars dropped high explosive rounds with terrifying precision into the Marine ranks. The company was bleeding out, paralyzed on the open ground. The textbook solution was suppressive fire and maneuver. But suppression against reinforced steel and concrete, manned by a disciplined enemy willing to fight the last man, required overwhelming force. The company's organic support, its own bar and light machine guns, were inadequate. They needed something more. They needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Enter Corporal Tony Stein. A former tool and die maker, Stein was a problem solver. He had already looked at the standard issue bar and seen not just a weapon, but a system to be improved. Even before the battle, he had scavenged a bar from a wrecked Navy aircraft on the beach. He went to work. He removed the bipod and the flash hider, machining down excess metal. He transformed the 20-pound squad automatic weapon into a sleek, handier assault rifle. He carried it one-handed, like a pistol. And he carried his own ammunition, magazines hung from his neck, stuffed in his pockets, hooked on his belt. Tony Stein had, through sheer ingenuity, turned himself into a self-contained mobile firebase. The order came down the chain as a simple, desperate imperative. Silence those guns. There was no time for a detailed assault plan. Artillery was preoccupied across the front. It was a job for infantry, and it was a job that looked suicidal. At approximately 1,000 hours, Stein made his first move. While his comrades laid down what covering fire they could, a sporadic crackle of Mohngarrens against the constant drone of Japanese machine guns, he initiated his lone wolf assault. He did not crawl. He did not take a circuitous route. He sprinted directly up the slope, a solitary figure against the grey expanse, heading for the lowest bunker in the network. The initial shock worked in his favour. The Japanese gunners, their focus fixed on the main marine line, were slow to register this single racing target. Stein covered the first 50 yards in a blur. At 30 yards from the first bunker, a low, rectangular slab of concrete, he dropped to one knee. The Japanese machine gunner inside began to swing his weapon. Stein was faster. He raised his modified bar to his shoulder and fired a sustained 5-round burst directly into the dark aperture. The 36 rounds caromed inside the steel-reinforced chamber with deafening, catastrophic effect. The machine gun fell silent. Smoke oozed from the port, but the report of his bar was a beacon. Instantly, fire converged on his position. Bullets snapped past his ears and thwacked into the ash around him. This was the true test. Now every enemy soldier on that hillside knew his location and his lethal intent. Stein did not retreat to the American line. Instead, he used the one piece of terrain available to him, the battlefield itself. He lunged forward into a shell crater, then to a rocky outcropping, moving laterally, never staying still. His goal was the next bunker, 40 yards to the left and slightly uphill. His method was brutal, close-quarters work. He would maneuver, using dead ground and craters, to get within 10-15 yards of a bunker's blind spot, its side or rear. There, he would rise and empty a magazine into any opening, a firing port, a ventilation shaft, a potential door. Often, he would then pull the pin on a Mackay fragmentation grenade, count to 2 and lob it inside to ensure the job was finished. The crump of the explosion was muffled, final. By 1100 hours, he had neutralized 3 positions. But his modified bar, firing on full auto almost continuously, was reaching its physical limits. The barrel glowed a dull cherry red. The forearm began to smoulder. Without a bipod, Stein had to hold the searing metal. The smell of burning flesh mixed with cordite. He ignored it. His greatest vulnerability was ammunition. A standard bar magazine held 20 rounds. In this kind of fighting, he burned through them in seconds. So Corporal Stein instituted a deadly routine. After knocking out a bunker, he would turn and sprint back down the hill, through the same gauntlet of fire, to the company a line. And more mags! Grenades! He'd bark, his voice raw. Marines would frantically hand him their spare bar magazine. He'd gulp from a canteen, wipe the grime and sweat from his eyes with a singed sleeve, and without a word, turn and charge back up into the maelstrom. Each round trip was a separate act of courage. Japanese riflemen and snipers now specifically hunted this relentless, resupplying phantom. By noon, he had destroyed 5 bunkers. The crack in the Japanese line was tangible, but the core of the network, a complex of 11 heavier, mutually supporting positions, remained intact. The company commander, Captain John G. Gorman, faced a critical decision. He could not order another man on what was clearly a near-certain death mission, but he could maximize the impact of the one man who was volunteering for it. He coordinated with a supporting weapons platoon. A 37mm M3 anti-tank gun was positioned several hundred yards back. Its high-explosive rounds were ineffective against the bunkers, but it had another shell in its locker, the M2 canister. This was essentially a giant shotgun shell, packed with 122 lead balls. It wouldn't penetrate the concrete, but fired at a firing port, it would turn the aperture into a whirlwind of lethal fragments, suppressing and maiming anyone inside. A new, even more dangerous plan was formed. The 37mm would fire a canister at a target bunker. In the seconds of shock and disruption that followed, Stein would assault. It required split-second timing and placed Stein horrifyingly close to the blast zone of the American supporting fire. Stein, his face a mask of soot and determination, listened. He collected 8 fresh magazines. He wrapped more rags around the blistering forearm of his bar. The temperature was climbing into the 80s, the sulfur stench a constant presence. The stage was set for a 30-minute symphony of destruction. At 13:20 hours, the plan launched. The sharp, concussive "hoomp" of the 37mm gun echoed across the slope. A cloud of dust and debris erupted around the firing port of a central pillbox. The Japanese machine gun fire from that position ceased abruptly. Stein was already in motion. He broke from cover in a low sprint. But the Japanese in the adjacent bunker, untouched by the canister, immediately shifted fire onto him. Tracer rounds stitched a line in the ash, racing toward his feet. He dove behind the shattered remains of a previous bunker, the impact of rounds on concrete spraying chips around him. The crossfire was too perfect, too disciplined. For a long, terrible moment, he was pinned. The assault had stalled before it began. From the marine lines, it looked like a death trap. The 37mm crew, seeing his predicament, traversed their gun with frantic speed. Another hoomp. The canister round struck the second bunker, blasting its aperture. In that fleeting window of respite, Stein moved. He covered the last 20 yards in a final, lung-bursting dash and threw himself against the concrete wall of the first target, his chest heaving. He was safe from that bunker's fire, but exposed to the entire hillside. He had seconds. He edged to the mangled firing port, now a jagged hole. He didn't look inside. He inverted his bar and fired a full magazine on automatic, hazing the interior from ceiling to floor. The sound from within was chaotic. He then pulled the pins on 2 grenades, dropped them through the hole, and pressed himself flat against the wall. The dual, muffled thump-thump vibrated through the concrete. Bunker number 6 was silent, The cost was immediate. A sniper's bullet from higher on hill 382 struck his Mohn helmet with a resounding clang, spinning it off his head. Almost simultaneously, a round from a spider hole grazed his left forearm, tearing his dungaree and drawing a line of bright blood. Stein barely flinched. He retrieved his helmet, saw the crease carved into the steel, and put it back on. He tied a crude bandage around his arm and kept fighting. The next 4 positions fell in a relentless 10-minute blur. It was a brutal rhythm. The distant whoomp, the sprint, the point-blank burst, the grenade. He was a creature of pure momentum, using the dust clouds from the 37 MA impact as a screen, using the corpses of the bunkers he had just killed as stepping stones to the next. But the toll was accumulating. The burns on his hands were now severe. His wounded arm throbbed. Dehydration and exhaustion sapped his strength. Each sprint was slower, each magazine felt heavier. By 1340 hours he had silenced 10 bunkers. But the heart of the complex, a set of 6 larger, deeply dug-in positions with suspected tunnel connections, loomed ahead. These were the anchors of the defence. Seeing his slowing pace, Captain Gorman radioed the battalion forward observer. "We need to get Stein out of there. He's done enough." But before the message could be relayed, the battlefield shifted once more. From a concealed trench line to the east, a Taishan squad of Japanese infantry, perhaps 10 strong, launched a local counterattack. They had infiltrated through a tunnel and now emerged, bayonets fixed, charging down a shallow gully directly towards Stein's exposed flank. Their goal was clear: overrun this demon who was destroying their fortress. Stein saw the movement from the corner of his eye. He was caught in a fatal pincer. The remaining bunkers to his front, a bayonet charge to his side. He swung his bar toward this new immediate threat, squeezed the trigger, and heard only a dull metallic click. The weapon, pushed miles beyond its design limits, fouled by ash and carbon, had finally jammed. A complex stovepipe cartridge extraction. It would take precious seconds to clear. Seconds he did not have. The Japanese were less than 15 yards away, their screams audible over the gunfire. Tony Stein, wounded, exhausted, with a useless primary weapon, stood utterly alone. The miraculous run had met its seemingly inevitable end. In that fraction of a second, when hope should have evaporated, Tony Stein's training and temperament took absolute control. He did not fumble with the jam. He did not turn to run. He let the bar fall on its sling, and in one fluid, practiced motion drew his .45 caliber 1911A1 pistol from its leather holster. He planted his feet, raised the pistol in a 2-handed combat stance, and began to fire. Crack, crack, crack. The reports were sharp, deliberate, measured against the automatic weapons fire. He was a target shooter on a lethal range. The lead Japanese soldier crumpled. A second stumbled and fell. Stein shifted his aim, firing again. His calm was as terrifying as his fire. The ferocity of the Japanese charge broke against this wall of precise, unexpected resistance. This momentary hesitation was all the Marines of company needed. From their lines, a concentrated volley of rifle and machine gun fire tore into the gully, cutting down the remaining attackers. The immediate infantry threat was obliterated. But Stein was still in the open, armed only with a 7-round pistol, facing multiple active bunkers. What he did next was the stuff of legend. He turned and ran, not back to the safety of the American lines, but diagonally across the fire-swept slope toward the 37 Megan position itself. He sprinted through the hail of fire, his jammed bar bouncing on his hip, his empty pistol in his hand. He slid into the gun pit, breathing in ragged gasps. Our bar jammed. Barrels welded, he spat out to the stunned crew. I need another gun. There was no spare bar. But a gunner looking at a disabled 1919A4 30 caliber machine gun whose belt feed mechanism had been shattered by a mortar fragment earlier that morning had an idea. Oh. The gun's good, Corporal, but it won't feed from the tray. You got a single load it. It was a monstrous suggestion. The M1919 weighed over 30 pounds without its tripod. It was designed for sustained fire from a fixed position, not assault. Stein looked at it, then back at the hillside. He nodded. He grabbed the heavy machine gun, its barrel still warm. He slung a 250-round ammunition belt over his shoulder like a bandolier. With the 37 Meyer, Crew laying down a furious rate of fire to distract the remaining bunkers, Stein charged back into the fight. He reached the husk of the last bunker he'd destroyed. From this vantage, he had a clear, if exposed, field of fire to the final complex, now just 50 yards distant. What followed was a stunning display of fieldcraft and raw nerve. Tony Stein used the broken machine gun as a gigantic single-shot rifle. He would pull a cartridge from the belt, manually insert it into the chamber, and close the bolt. He would then brace the scorching hot barrel against the concrete rubble, aim carefully for the narrow firing slit of a bunker, and fire. Boom! The report of the .30 caliber was heavier, deeper than the bar. The armor-piercing round would smash into the aperture, fragmenting and ricocheting with horrific effect inside the confined space. He worked with mechanical precision. Load, aim, boom. Assess, shift target, load, aim, boom. He was a one-man artillery piece. Japanese fire concentrated on his new position, but he was now behind substantial cover. The 37 their gun continued its suppressive fire. One by one, the remaining bunkers fell silent, their firing ports shattered, their interiors turned into abattoirs by the heavy rounds. At approximately 1350 hours, the last position was cleared by a supporting Marine fire team with grenades. The hill fell into an eerie, ringing quiet, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of burning material. In 30 minutes of continuous, close-quarters combat, Corporal Tony Stein had systematically destroyed 16 enemy fortifications. He had made 8 round trips through the kill zone for ammunition. He had fought with a modified bar, a .45 pistol, and a disabled machine gun. He had been wounded. He had been targeted by every Japanese soldier on that slope, and he had won. The tactical result was immediate and decisive. The paralysis of Company A was broken. The Marines advanced and secured the vital ground, turning the captured bunkers into strongpoints for their own advance toward Hill 382. The price for Company A had been heavy, but without Stein's actions, it would have been annihilation. Medics counted over 70 Japanese dead in the complex Stein had neutralized, many killed by his direct fire. Tony Stein, after having his arm wound properly dressed, refused evacuation. He cleared the jam from his beloved bar, acquired fresh magazines, and rejoined his squad. The battle for Iwo Jima was a relentless, grinding affair. For Stein, it would last another 7 days. On March 1, 1945, during the vicious fighting for Hill 362B in the northern sector of the island, Corporal Tony Stein was scouting ahead of his platoon near the village of Kitano Point. A single Japanese sniper, hidden in the labyrinth of caves, found his mark. Stein was killed instantly. The man who had survived a direct charge into the teeth of 16 fortifications fell to an unseen enemy. A tragic, ironic end that underscored the brutal, random nature of the battle for Iwo Jima. The cost of the campaign was almost beyond comprehension. The Marines suffered over 26,000 casualties, including nearly 7,000 dead. The Japanese garrison was virtually wiped out, with only a few hundred of the 21,000 defenders surviving. In this cauldron of sacrifice, individual heroism was commonplace, yet some actions shone with a particular intensity. For his inconspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty on February 21, 1945, Corporal Anthony L. Stein was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. He was also awarded the Purple Heart. His legacy is not merely one of bravery, but of intelligent, adaptive courage. He was a craftsman soldier who optimized his tools and his tactics for the impossible task at hand. He demonstrated that the will of one resolute individual, armed with initiative and an utter disregard for personal safety, could change the outcome of a battle. The weapon was designed for 2 men. On that day, on that slope, 1 man was enough. The story of Corporal Tony Stein is a stark testament to the fact that in the vast mechanized horror of total war, the human element remains the ultimate determinant. It is a story of ingenuity, of sacrifice, and of a courage so profound it bends the arc of battle itself. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. Type 92 heavy machine gun, joined by the deeper, slower thump-thump-thump of an American Browning. They duel for a moment before fading into a tense, rhythmic electronic pulse. There is a moment in combat when theory evaporates, when maps and plans are rendered meaningless by a wall of concrete and intersecting streams of bullets, when the only thing that matters is the will of the man who stands up. In the Pacific War, the Imperial Japanese Army had perfected a doctrine of defense in depth. Networks of bunkers dug into the very bones of islands, designed to bleed an attacker white. Against such systems, the United States Marine Corps relied on courage, coordination, and overwhelming firepower. But on one day, on one god-forsaken piece of volcanic rock, the entire complex equation of modern warfare was reduced to a single stunning variable. One Marine, one modified weapon, and 30 minutes that would rewrite the definition of impossible. This is how it happened. This is the story of how the Japanese couldn't stop this Marine with a two-man weapon until 16 bunkers fell in 30 minutes. The clock read 1,000 hours, February 21, 1945. The map coordinate was the central sector of Iwo Jima, specifically the broken ground southeast of Hill 382. The unit was Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marine Division, 5th Marine Division. And they were dying, pinned on an open slope by a fortress they could not see. The strategic objective was clear: capture the Motoyama Plateau and its key heights, hills 362A, 362B, and 382. These formed the spine of the Japanese defense, protecting the northern airfield and the command complex of General Kurabayashi himself. For the 28th Marines, Hill 382 was the immediate, brutal task. Corporal Anthony L. Stein, serial number 547,503, was a squad leader in Company A. At 24, he was older than many of his men. A former toolmaker from Dayton, Ohio, he possessed a craftsman's mind, analytical, practical, and innovative. Even during the chaos of the initial landings on D-Day, February 19th, Stein had been thinking. He'd seen the limitations of the standard-issue Browning automatic rifle in the soft, clogging ash of Iwo Jima. The weapon, while reliable, was heavy and cumbersome for the aggressive, close quarters fighting the terrain demanded, so he improvised. He located a bar from a damaged aircraft, part of the vast, logistical tail stranded on the beach. In a quiet moment, he went to work with the tools of his previous trade. He removed the bipod, a useless appendage in assault. He machined off the flash hider. He stripped it down to its essential components: receiver, barrel, stock, and pistol grip. He transformed a crew-served squad support weapon into a handier, faster-handling assault rifle. It was a violation of ordnance regulations, a classic example of a Marine adapting his gear to the fight. But Tony Stein didn't stop there. He foresaw the ammunition problem. He rigged extra magazine pouches and carried so many 36 magazines on his person that he jangled when he moved. He was, in effect, his own mobile ammunition bearer. On the morning of the 21st, Company A's attack toward Hill 382 ground to a bloody halt against what after-action reports would call a complex B-7. This was not a random collection of holes. It was a meticulously designed defensive web of 16 positions. These included Type 4 concrete and steel pillboxes with walls up to 4 feet thick, smaller log and earth reinforced machine gun nests and rifle pits, all connected by communication trenches and likely tunnels. Their fields of fire were interlocked. Attacking one meant exposing your flank to two others. From these silent dark apertures, the Japanese 2nd Mixed Brigade's veterans waited. The first hour of Company A's assault was a lesson in futility. Marine rifle teams would rush forward, only to be cut down by the unseen, crisscrossing fire. The company's own supporting 6DM mortars made little impact on the reinforced concrete. Casualties mounted. The company commander, Captain John Gorman, knew a direct frontal assault would annihilate his unit. He needed a precision strike. He needed to blind the complex, one eye at a time. He called for Corporal Stein. The order was simple. See if you can get close. See if you can silence some of those guns. It was less a command, more a desperate request for a miracle. Stein checked his weapon. He ensured a magazine was seated. So he looked at the slope, a 200-yard incline of grey ash dotted with shell craters and the bodies of fallen Marines. He did not wait for covering fire to build. He simply moved. His initial sprint caught the Japanese off guard. They were focused on the main marine line, Hendu. Stein, a lone figure moving with shocking speed, closed the distance to the first bunker, a low-slung pillbox with a primary firing port facing the marine lines. He did not attack from the front. He angled his run to approach from the oblique, the bunker's blind spot. At 15 yards, he dropped to a kneeling position, raised the bar, and fired a controlled burst into the side of the structure, seeking a secondary aperture or ventilation shaft. The brr-purr-purr was answered by a scream from inside. He then rushed the final feet, pulled the pin on a grenade, held it for a 2 count and rolled it into the main port. The explosion was a dull, contained roar. Bunker 1 was dead. The sound was a beacon. Immediately, machine gun fire from 2 adjacent positions snapped toward him, kicking up fountains of ash. Stein was now the primary target. He dove into a nearby shell crater, the impact thwacking into the far rim. He was pinned. For 3 long minutes, he remained there as bullets cracked overhead. He could not go back. He could not stay. His only option was to go forward, deeper into the maze. He waited for a lull, a moment when one of the Japanese guns ceased to reload or shift targets. When it came, he was up and moving again, a low, scrambling dash to the cover of a rocky outcropping. He was now within the Japanese defensive belt. Every direction held danger. His method evolved into a lethal drill. Identify the next target. Wait for the covering fire from Company A's machine guns to intensify, a sound he used as an audio cue. Sprint to the closest cover near the bunker's flank or rear. Execute a button-up maneuver. Fire a full magazine into any opening to suppress and kill, followed by 1 or 2 grenades to ensure destruction. Then, immediately displace before retaliatory fire could pinpoint him. By 11:30 hours, he had destroyed 4 bunkers. But his bar, fired incessantly on full auto, was suffering. The barrel was overheated, the gas system fouling, and he was out of ammunition. Here, Stein executed the first of his daring resupply runs. He turned and sprinted downhill back through the gauntlet to the American lines. Marines watched in awe as this smoke-blackened figure emerged from the hellscape, barking for magazines. All you can spare. And grenades! He stuffed his pockets, hung magazines around his neck, and without pausing for more than a sip of water, turned and charged back up into the fire. These round trips became a terrifying ritual. Each one defied the fundamental logic of survival. Around noon, after neutralizing his 6th position, Stein's modified bar reached its breaking point. The barrel was literally glowing, the wood handguard smoldering. He could no longer hold it without searing his hands through his gloves. He retreated to a crater, wrapping more rags around the forearm. Captain Gorman, observing through binoculars, knew the one-man offensive was unsustainable. But its effect was undeniable. A wedge was being driven into the Japanese complex Gorman coordinated with his weapons platoon commander. A 37 mm 3 anti-tank gun, useless against tanks on Iwo Jima but still valuable, was manhandled into a forward position. Its crew was given a new mission, not to destroy the bunkers, but to stun them. They loaded the M2 canister round. At this range, it would not penetrate, but firing into a firing port would turn the interior into a storm of flying lead balls and concrete fragments. A temporary, but horrifying, suppression. A new, even more perilous tactic was born. The 37 would fire. Stein would assault in the immediate aftermath. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and he'd be hit by American fire. Too late and the Japanese would recover. It required a trust between the gun crew and the lone marine that was absolute. Stein, nursing his burning weapon, received the plan. He simply nodded. He collected a fresh batch of magazines, doused his gloves in water from a canteen, and moved to his start line. A shell hole 70 yards from the next cluster of bunkers. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, cordite, and death. The temperature climbed. At 13:20 hours, the 37 May gunner took his first shot. The crump of the 37 May was distinctive. A cloud of dust and debris erupted from the firing port of a central pillbox. The machine gun within fell silent. Stein broke from cover, but the supporting bunker to the left, untouched by the canister, immediately traversed its fire. Tracers walked toward him, stitching a line in the earth. He hit the dirt, crawling desperately as rounds impacted inches away, throwing grit into his face. He was caught in a lethal open space. The plan was failing. From the marine lines, it appeared he was about to be cut in half. The 37 gun crew, seeing his peril, acted without orders. The loader slammed another canister round into the breach. The gunner, risking exposure, stood to his sight and fired at the second bunker. The round struck just below the aperture. The Japanese gunfire wavered. In that microsecond of distraction, Stein found his opening. He surged up and covered the last 10 yards in a final lung-bursting sprint, throwing himself against the concrete wall of the first bunker. He was safe from that gun, but horrifyingly exposed to the rest of the hill. He had to work fast. Ignoring the gunfire snapping around him, he sidestepped to the mangled firing port. He inverted his bar and emptied the entire magazine on full auto, sweeping the muzzle back and forth to saturate the interior. The sound from inside was catastrophic. Without pausing, he pulled the pins on 2 grenades, dropped them in, and pressed his back against the wall. The dual concussive thuds shook the structure. Bunker 7, he paid for it instantly. A ricochet or a near miss from a sniper tore through the meat of his left calf. He grunted, stumbling. Blood instantly soaked his dungaree. He tied a hasty tourniquet from a bandage, the pain a white-hot fire. He could not run now. He could only hobble. Yet he did not fall back. The momentum of the assault, the sheer kinetic energy of his rage, carried him forward. Leveraging the rubble of the destroyed bunkers as cover, he used his good leg to push himself toward the next target. The 37 Meiji continued its suppressive fire. Over the next 10 minutes, in a display of agonizing determination, he silenced 3 more positions. He was a wounded, limping engine of destruction. By 1345 hours, he had destroyed 11 bunkers. He was deep inside the complex, separated from American lines by a moonscape now swept by focused Japanese fire. His bar was again empty, its barrel warped and useless. His calf wound bled through the bandage. His hands were covered in second-degree burns. And before him lay the final, largest strongpoint, a reinforced concrete command bunker with multiple firing ports, flanked by 2 final machine gun nests. These were the anchors. Captain Gorman, watching through field glasses, made the call. "Get a stretcher team ready. We're pulling him out." "He's done." But as the order was transmitted, the Japanese made their move. A squad of enemy infantry, perhaps 10 men, erupted from a hidden tunnel exit behind the command bunker. They had been held in reserve. Now, with bayonets fixed, they charged directly at Stein's position, screaming a banzai. Their goal was to overrun this lone Marine who had caused so much ruin. Stein saw them coming. He raised his bar, squeezed the trigger. Click. The overheated, fouled weapon had finally succumbed to a catastrophic jam. A cartridge was wedged in the chamber. It would take 2 hands and precious time to clear. He was trapped, wounded, with a useless primary weapon, facing a bayonet charge from one direction and the final bunkers from the other. The math of war had finally caught up to Tony Stein. The impossible run was over. What happened next was not taught in any manual. It was the raw, unmediated reaction of a combat-hardened warrior. Stein let the bar fall on its sling. In the same motion, his right hand drew his .45 caliber pistol. He did not retreat. He braced himself against the rubble, raised the pistol in a 2-handed grip, and began to fire. Crack! Crack! The reports were deliberate, spaced. The lead Japanese soldier, only yards away, collapsed. Stein shifted aim. Crack! A second man stumbled. His calm was terrifying, a stark contrast to the screaming charge. He was a rock in a raging stream. His accurate fire broke the momentum of the charge. The Japanese infantrymen hesitated, hitting the ground. This momentary pause was all the Marines of Company A needed. A concentrated volley of rifle and machine gun fire from the main line tore into the exposed squad, cutting them down. The immediate threat was eliminated, but Stein was still in the open, armed with a pistol holding maybe 3 rounds, facing the final, untouched bunkers. What he did next defied belief. Instead of crawling back to safety, he turned and began to hobble laterally across the slope, not toward the American lines, but toward the distant, exposed position of the 37 Mean gun crew. He moved in a painful, limping dash, bullets kicking up ash around his feet. He covered the 50-yard gap and tumbled into the gun pit, his chest heaving. "A bar dead!" he gasped to the stunned crew. "He need another gun." There was no spare bar, but the gunner's mate, a resourceful sailor attached to the Marine Weapons Company, pointed to a wrecked 1919 A4 .30 caliber machine gun. Its tripod was gone, and more critically, its feed tray and paw mechanism had been shattered by shrapnel. It was a crew-served, sustained-fire weapon. Using it as a single-shot rifle was tactical nonsense. Stein looked at the heavy, broken gun, then back at the hill. He saw the final bunkers, their ports still spitting fire. He nodded. "Help me with it." The gun crew lifted the heavy weapon. Stein slung a belt of .30 caliber ammunition over his shoulder. With the 37 main gun firing canister as fast as it could be loaded to draw enemy fire, Stein, clutching the massive machine gun, half crawled, half limped back to his forward position. From behind the rubble of Bunker 11, he set up his new, absurd weapon. He pulled a single round from the ammunition belt. He manually inserted it into the chamber, working the bolt. He braced the scorching hot barrel against a chunk of concrete, aiming carefully at the primary firing slit of the command bunker, 50 yards away. He took a breath and fired. The report was monumental, a deep, concussive blast that dwarfed the sound of the bar. The armor-piercing round struck the edge of the firing port, fragmenting into a spray of molten metal and concrete shards that ricocheted inside the bunker. The Japanese machine gun from that port ceased. Stein worked with the methodical patience of a master machinist. Load. Aim. Load. Aim. He targeted the secondary ports. He targeted the machine gun nest to the left. Each round was a deliberate, punishing hammer blow. The Japanese inside had never experienced such precise, heavy-caliber fire at point-blank range. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. Within minutes, the final machine gun nest was silenced by a supporting Marine fire team with bazookas. The command bunker, its ports shattered, its interior a charnel house from the ricocheting 30 caliber rounds, fell quiet. At 13:50 hours, a sudden, heavy silence descended on the slope. The relentless chatter of Japanese guns was gone. In 30 minutes of continuous, close-quarters combat, Corporal Tony Stein had systematically annihilated 16 fortified positions. He had made 8 resupply runs through a kill zone. He had fought with 3 different weapons. He had been wounded, and he had single-handedly broken the back of a key Japanese strongpoint. The tactical victory was immediate. Company A, which had been paralysed and bleeding, now advanced and secured the entire complex. The captured ground provided a crucial foothold for the continued assault on Hill 382, a battle that would rage for several more days. Inspections of the bunkers later revealed the horrific efficiency of Stein's work. Many contained multiple enemy dead killed by direct gunfire and grenade blasts. Tony Stein had his calf wound properly dressed at a battalion aid station. He refused evacuation. He cleared the jam from his bar, acquired a replacement barrel from a fallen comrade's weapon, and returned to his squad. The battle for Iwo Jima had weeks left. Tragically, Tony Stein's war had only days. On the morning of March 1, 1945, during the brutal reduction of the Kitano Point defences in the island's far north, Stein was leading a patrol. As he peered around a rocky outcrop, a single sniper's bullet struck him in the head, killing him instantly. He was 24 years old. The man who had conquered a fortified hill died in a moment of silent, anonymous violence, a stark reminder of the ever-present randomness of war. The Battle of Iwo Jima concluded on March 26, 1945. The cost was apocalyptic. The Marines suffered 26,038 total casualties, with 6,821 killed in action. The Japanese garrison was almost completely wiped out. Of approximately 21,000 defenders, only 216 were taken prisoner. In this crucible of sacrifice where heroism was commonplace, the actions of Corporal Stein stood out for their sheer, focused intensity. On February 1946, President Harry S. Truman presented the Medal of Honor posthumously to Stein's widow, Joan. His citation immortalized his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, his aggressive initiative, and his valiant spirit in the face of terrific odds. He was also awarded the Purple Heart. Tony Stein's legacy is multifaceted. He is a symbol of the Marine Corps ethos of adaptability and relentless offensive spirit. But more than that, his story is one of intelligent courage. He was not a mindless berserker. He was a craftsman who